For many television fans, few comedy shows have built a reputation as bold and unpredictable as It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Since its debut in 2005, the series has gained a loyal fan base that loves its strange humor, selfish characters, and outrageous stories. The show follows a group of friends who run a failing bar called Patty's Pub in Philadelphia. Instead of being kind or heroic like characters in most sitcoms, the group often behaves in terrible ways. They lie, cheat, manipulate each other, and usually make every situation worse. Yet this unusual approach is exactly what made the show stand out in television history. While many viewers know the jokes and famous moments from the series, there are many surprising facts behind the scenes that even longtime fans do not fully know. One of the strangest moments in the show's history happened in June 2020, when 5 episodes suddenly disappeared from streaming platforms without warning. These episodes vanished from services like Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon almost overnight. Even more surprising, some fans who had already purchased the episodes digitally found that they had been removed from their personal libraries. In some cases, companies like Apple quietly refunded customers and erased the episodes completely. For viewers, the situation felt confusing and mysterious. Why would a network remove episodes that had already aired for years? Why were they suddenly gone after being available for so long? The answer was connected to the controversial humor that the show sometimes explored. Several of the removed episodes included scenes that streaming services later decided were offensive or insensitive by modern standards. Because of this, the companies chose to remove them rather than risk public criticism. What made the situation even stranger was the silence from the people who created the show. For more than a year, the cast and writers avoided talking about the missing episodes publicly. Fans speculated online about what had happened and whether the episodes would ever return. When the creators finally addressed the situation, they explained that the show had always pushed boundaries and experimented with uncomfortable humor. The series was never meant to present perfect role models. Instead, it often showed terrible behavior in order to make fun of it. However, the streaming platforms decided that some scenes crossed a line that modern audiences might not accept. This controversy reminded viewers that the show has always walked a narrow line between comedy and shock. The same bold style that helped make the series famous also created moments that people still debate today. Even with the missing episodes, the show's legacy remains strong, and its unusual approach to comedy continues to attract new viewers every year. But the story behind those removed episodes is only one of many surprising chapters in the history of the series. Long before the show became one of the longest-running sitcoms in television history, it started in a much stranger and more uncertain way than most fans realize. Long before It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia became a popular and long-running comedy series, its idea came from a strange and unexpected moment. The creator of the show, Rob McElhenney, once shared that the original inspiration came from a strange dream he had in the early 2000s. In that dream, a man who was seriously ill tried to tell his friend about his condition. Instead of reacting with concern or sadness, the friend acted completely cold and uninterested. The only reason he had visited was to borrow a cup of sugar. The moment felt uncomfortable, awkward, and even a little disturbing. But at the same time, it had a strange kind of humor in it. When McElhenney woke up, the idea stayed in his mind. He realized that the uncomfortable feeling in that dream could become the foundation for a very different type of comedy. Instead of writing characters who were kind and supportive like in most sitcoms, he imagined a group of people who were selfish, careless, and completely insensitive to the feelings of others. That idea became the heart of the show. McElhenney shared the concept with his friends and fellow actors Charlie Day and Glenn Howerton. The three of them were young actors trying to build careers in Hollywood, but they had very little money and almost no connections in the television industry. Still, they believed the idea was unique enough to stand out. Instead of waiting for a network to give them an opportunity, they decided to create their own pilot episode, using almost no budget at all. In 2003, they filmed a short pilot that reportedly cost somewhere between $85 and $200 to produce. This extremely low cost was possible because they borrowed cameras from friends and used their own apartments as filming locations. There were no professional lights, no full crew, and no expensive equipment. Whoever was not acting in a scene would hold the camera or help record sound. They filmed scenes on weekends and often repeated them many times until something looked usable. The goal was not to create a perfect production, but simply to show the tone and humor of the idea. At that time, the story was slightly different from what audiences would later see on television. The characters were still named Charlie, Glenn, and Mac, but they were struggling actors living in Los Angeles rather than bar owners in Philadelphia. The early version of the show focused on their personal problems and their selfish behavior while trying to succeed in Hollywood. Even though the project was rough and simple, it had a unique energy that caught the attention of industry executives. Eventually, the pilot reached the cable network FX, where executives were looking for unusual and low-budget comedy ideas that could stand out from traditional sitcoms. When the network reviewed the pilot, they saw potential in the strange and uncomfortable humor that the three creators had developed. However, they also believed the show needed a stronger setting and a clearer identity. This suggestion would lead to one of the most important creative decisions in the show's history. Instead of following struggling actors in Los Angeles, the characters would become the owners of a small and failing bar in Philadelphia. This simple change helped shape the world that fans would later know as Patty's Pub and created the setting where the characters' selfish behavior could lead to endless chaotic situations. After FX showed interest in the unusual pilot created by Rob McElhenney, Charlie Day, and Glenn Howerton, the small project began to slowly grow into a real television series. However, the early days of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia were still filled with uncertainty and major changes behind the scenes. One of the biggest changes involved a person who had played an important role in the show's earliest development, but is rarely mentioned today. Before the character of Dee became the sarcastic and chaotic personality that fans know, the role was originally played by actress Jordan Reed. Reed was not just another performer helping with the pilot. She was deeply involved in the creative process during the earliest stages of the project. When the original pilot was filmed, everyone involved had to help with every part of production. Since there was almost no money, there were no professional crew members to handle technical work. Reed helped carry cameras, hold boom microphones, and organize small details during filming. She even allowed the team to use her apartment in Los Angeles as a filming location because it was cleaner and easier to use than the homes of the other actors. In the earliest version of the story, her character was different from the version audiences later saw on television. Instead of being cynical and constantly insulted by the rest of the group, the first version of the character, often called Sweet Dee, was actually more kind, hopeful, and somewhat naive. The tone of the character was softer and more traditional compared with the darker humor that the show eventually embraced. During this early period, Reed and McElhenney were also in a romantic relationship. However, as the show moved closer to becoming a real television production, that relationship eventually ended. According to accounts that Reed later shared publicly, the breakup also affected her future with the project. When the relationship ended, she was no longer involved with the show's production. Not long afterward, the role was recast with actress Caitlin Olsen, who joined the series in 2005 when the first season was officially produced for television. The change happened quickly, and the character was rewritten to fit Olsen's strong comedic style. Instead of being sweet and optimistic, Dee became much more aggressive, sarcastic, and competitive with the rest of the group. This new version of the character fit perfectly with the show's darker humor. Over time, Olsen's performance became one of the most memorable parts of the series, and Dee's constant attempts to prove herself while being insulted by her friends turned into a running joke that fans still love. Years later, Reed wrote about her experiences during the early days of the show, explaining that she had been young and inexperienced in the entertainment industry at the time. She described feeling uncertain about how to speak up or defend her role during those early business decisions. Eventually, she moved on to build a different career as a writer and author, publishing books such as Ramshackle Glam and other lifestyle writing projects. While her involvement in the show ended before it became successful, the story of those early days highlights how chaotic and unpredictable television development can be. Many projects changed dramatically before reaching audiences, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia was no exception. With Olsen now part of the cast and the main creative team in place, the show was finally ready to begin filming its first official season. However, even after receiving approval from FX, the series still faced a major challenge that could have ended it before it ever had the chance to grow into the long-running comedy that viewers know today. When the first official season of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia finally began production, the creators quickly realized that getting a television show approved was only the beginning of their struggle. Even though the network FX believed in the idea, the budget they provided was extremely small compared with other sitcoms being produced at the time. The early episodes reportedly had a budget of around $450,000 each, which might sound like a lot of money, but in the world of television, it was considered very low. Many popular sitcoms on major networks often cost more than $1 million per episode. Because of this limited budget, the production team had to find creative ways to save money while still making the show look professional enough for television. The small crew often filmed scenes in unusual locations because renting expensive studio space was not possible in the beginning. One of the main filming locations was the abandoned Los Angeles Herald-Examiner building, which provided large empty rooms that could be turned into different sets. Even the cast had to deal with difficult conditions while filming. All of the main actors shared one small trailer during production breaks. According to stories told later in interviews, the trailer often smelled unpleasant and felt crowded, but the cast tried to laugh about the situation rather than complain. At the time, none of them were famous, and they were simply happy to have the chance to create a television show. Rob McElhenney himself was not earning much money during the first season. In fact, he later revealed that he continued working as a waiter at a restaurant in West Hollywood while filming the show. After finishing scenes during the day, he would sometimes change clothes and go directly to work at the restaurant in order to pay his bills. The rest of the cast faced similar financial uncertainty. Charlie Day, Glenn Howerton, and Caitlin Olsen were still early in their acting careers and did not know if the show would succeed. Despite these challenges, the team remained determined to keep the show's creative spirit alive. One example of this determination can be seen in the show's opening credits. Instead of hiring a professional film crew to create an expensive introduction, the cast filmed the footage themselves during a nighttime drive through Philadelphia. They used a handheld camera to capture simple shots of bridges, streets, and the city skyline. The images were slightly shaky and looked less polished than a traditional television opening sequence, but they had a unique charm that matched the tone of the show. When the network later suggested replacing the footage with something more professional, the creators decided to keep the original version because it felt authentic. As the show slowly built its identity, the cast and writers continued experimenting with strange story ideas and bold humor that most sitcoms would never attempt. However, even with their creative energy and dedication, the show's future remained uncertain during the first season. Ratings were not especially high, and the network still wondered whether audiences would accept such a dark and unusual comedy. At this critical moment, one important decision by FX would change the entire future of the series and introduce a legendary actor whose presence would help the show survive its early struggles and eventually become one of the longest-running sitcoms in television history. The turning point for It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia came when the network decided the show needed a bigger name to attract viewers. Even though the creators believed strongly in their strange style of comedy, the ratings during the first season were not very impressive. The executives at FX worried that the show might not survive if more people did not start watching it soon. At that time, the president of FX, John Landgraf, suggested bringing in a well-known actor who could help draw attention to the series. That idea eventually led to the arrival of legendary actor Danny DeVito. DeVito was already famous for many popular films and television roles, and his name alone could help the show reach a much wider audience. When he joined the series in its second season, he began playing the character Frank Reynolds, the wild and unpredictable father of Dennis and Dee. His arrival changed the energy of the show in a dramatic way. Frank was loud, strange, and often completely shameless in his behavior, which fit perfectly with the chaotic world of the series. At first, DeVito only had a limited amount of time available to film because of his busy schedule. Reports from the production team say he had only about 20 days to shoot his scenes for the entire season. This forced the writers to prepare every script before filming began, and organized the schedule carefully so that all of Frank's scenes could be completed within that short period. It was a difficult process, but the cast and crew managed to make it work. DeVito quickly embraced the show's strange sense of humor and seemed willing to try almost anything for a laugh. Over the years, his character became responsible for some of the most outrageous moments in the entire series. Scenes involving Frank often pushed the boundaries of comedy even further than before, and audiences loved the fearless energy he brought to the show. His presence also convinced the network that the series was worth investing in for a longer time. Because of his involvement, the budget for the show increased to more than $800,000 per episode, which allowed the production team to improve the sets, hire more crew members, and give raises to the main cast. Even with these improvements, the show still struggled to attract large television ratings during its early years. Many viewers did not discover the series until later, when episodes became available online and on DVD collections. However, the creative team never changed the core idea of the show. The characters continued behaving in selfish and ridiculous ways, and the writers kept exploring topics that other sitcoms usually avoided. This willingness to remain different eventually helped the show stand out in a crowded television landscape. As time passed, the series slowly built a strong fan base that appreciated its bold humor and unpredictable storytelling. What once seemed like a risky experiment with a tiny budget and uncertain future was beginning to develop into something much bigger. Yet even as the show became more stable and popular, the cast continued pushing themselves physically and creatively during filming, sometimes performing dangerous or painful stunts just to make certain scenes feel as real and funny as possible. As It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia continued to grow in popularity. The cast became known not only for their strange characters, but also for the extreme physical comedy that often appeared in the show. One actor who especially became famous for this kind of performance was Caitlin Olsen, who played Dee Reynolds. Dee was often the target of embarrassing situations, painful accidents, and chaotic moments that pushed the limits of what actors usually do in sitcoms. Unlike many television performers who rely heavily on stunt doubles, Olsen often preferred to perform difficult scenes herself because she believed it made the comedy feel more real. One of the most famous examples happened in a season 4 episode titled, Who Pooped the Bed? In one scene, Dee runs out of a store and slams directly into a parked car. The moment happens very quickly on screen, but behind the scenes it was far more intense than viewers realized. Olsen had the option to use a stunt double, and the stunt team was ready to perform the scene safely. However, she insisted on doing it herself because she believed the audience might notice if another person suddenly replaced her during the impact. Wearing heels that were slightly too small, she ran toward the car as fast as she could and collided with the door using her head and upper body. The impact was so strong that it left a real dent in the metal of the car. Members of the cast later explained in interviews that everyone on set was shocked by how hard she hit the vehicle. Some people even worried that she might have seriously injured her neck during the stunt. Despite the pain, Olsen reportedly joked about the situation afterward and said that the moment worked perfectly for the scene. What made the story even more surprising was that she initially wanted to try the stunt again because she felt the first take might not have looked dramatic enough. The production team quickly refused the idea because the impact had already been dangerous and the rented car had been damaged. Even after this incident, Olsen continued performing demanding physical comedy in later seasons of the show. In another famous episode called The Gang Goes to a Water Park, her character becomes stuck inside a narrow children's water slide while kids repeatedly crash into her from behind. The scene required her to remain in an uncomfortable position for long periods while filming multiple takes. According to the show's stunt coordinator, Olsen often asked for additional takes because she wanted the timing of the jokes to feel exactly right. This dedication helped make Dee one of the most memorable characters in the series. However, physical comedy was not the only challenge she faced during the show's early years. Before filming for one season even began, Olsen experienced a serious accident during a 4th of July celebration. According to stories she later shared, a neighbor jokingly lifted her over his head during the party but lost control and accidentally dropped her onto a hard surface. The fall resulted in a broken lower back, which required a long recovery period. Despite the injury, Olsen eventually returned to work and continued performing the demanding physical comedy that fans loved. Her willingness to endure these challenges showed how committed the cast was to making the show as funny and memorable as possible. While these behind-the-scenes stories highlight the risks involved in creating such bold comedy, they also reveal how much effort and determination went into building the chaotic world that viewers see on screen. While the cast of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia continued creating wild and memorable scenes, the business side of the show was going through its own dramatic journey. During the early seasons, the future of the series was never guaranteed. Even after the arrival of Danny DeVito helped attract more attention, the television ratings still did not grow as quickly as the network expected. For a traditional television show, ratings were extremely important because they determined how much advertising money a network could earn. If a show did not attract enough viewers during its broadcast time, the network might decide that it was too expensive to continue producing. This situation placed the comedy in a very uncertain position during its first few years. However, something unusual began happening that slowly changed the fate of the series. Instead of becoming popular through traditional television broadcasts, the show started building a loyal audience through alternative ways of watching. Around the late 2000s, online streaming platforms and DVD collections were becoming more common, and many viewers discovered the show through these formats rather than through the original FX broadcast. Fans began sharing episodes with friends, quoting memorable lines, and recommending the show online. This growing interest helped create a strong community of viewers who appreciated the unusual humor of the series. One important moment came when DVD sales for the show became surprisingly successful. Even though the television ratings were not extremely high, the DVD collection sold very well compared with other comedy series. At one point, the show's DVD releases were reportedly among the top-selling comedy collections in the market, ranking just behind extremely popular animated series like The Simpsons and Family Guy. These strong sales proved that there was a dedicated audience willing to support the series financially. Another change also helped improve the show's chances of survival. Around this time, television rating systems began adjusting how they measured viewership, especially among younger audiences such as college students who often watched shows online or through recorded episodes. When these viewers were included in the measurement system, the reported audience for the show suddenly increased. In some reports, the ratings rose by more than 20%, which helped convince the network that the series had long-term potential. Eventually, the show reached another major milestone when other networks began competing for the rights to air reruns. Syndication deals allow television shows to earn additional income by selling episodes to other channels that want to broadcast them again. When a network expressed interest in buying these rights, it demonstrated that the show had become valuable beyond its original broadcast. One deal reportedly brought tens of millions of dollars to FX, finally making the series profitable after several years of financial uncertainty. By this point, the show had proven that its strange style of comedy could survive in the television industry. The once tiny project created by a group of struggling actors had grown into a successful and stable series with a loyal fan base around the world. Yet even as the show reached new levels of success, it never lost the bold and risky comedic style that had defined it from the very beginning. That same fearless approach would eventually lead back to the controversy that started the mystery of the missing episodes and reminded audiences just how far the show was willing to go for comedy. As the years passed, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia transformed from a small and risky television experiment into one of the longest-running live-action sitcoms in television history. What began as a nearly zero-budget project created by a few struggling actors eventually became a cultural phenomenon with millions of loyal fans around the world. The cast members, Rob McElhenney, Charlie Day, Glenn Howerton, Caitlin Olsen, and Danny DeVito, remained deeply involved in shaping the series throughout its long run. Unlike many sitcom actors who only perform scripts written by others, the creators of this show continued writing, producing, and directing many of the episodes themselves. This close involvement helped preserve the strange and fearless tone that had made the series unique from the very beginning. Over time, the production budget grew far larger than the early seasons, eventually reaching over $1 million per episode. The show moved to more professional filming locations, gained a larger writing staff, and had access to better equipment and bigger sets. Yet despite these improvements, the creators intentionally kept many of the rough elements that had originally defined the show's style. The shaky camera shots, awkward conversations, and chaotic arguments between the characters remained central to the humor. Fans appreciated that the series never tried to become a traditional or polished sitcom. Instead, it continued focusing on the selfish and ridiculous behavior of the characters running Patty's pub. However, the same bold comedy that made the show popular also continued to create controversy. The writers frequently explored sensitive topics and social issues in ways that were meant to expose the ignorance and selfishness of the characters. The joke was often that the characters were behaving terribly and completely misunderstanding the world around them. For many years, audiences accepted this style because the series clearly presented the characters as foolish rather than heroic. But as social attitudes changed over time, some viewers began questioning certain older episodes. This growing debate eventually led back to the unusual event that shocked fans in 2020 when several episodes suddenly disappeared from major streaming platforms. The removed episodes included scenes that companies later believed could be offensive or misunderstood by modern audiences. Rather than editing the episodes or adding warnings, the streaming services decided to remove them entirely. This decision created confusion and frustration among many fans who believed the episodes were meant to criticize the behavior being shown rather than support it. The cast and creators later explained that the entire concept of the series had always been based on showing deeply flawed characters whose terrible choices create comedy. They argued that the characters themselves are the real joke, not the subjects they misunderstand. Even so, the debate around the missing episodes highlighted how much television and audience expectations had changed since the show first began. Today, the series remains an important part of comedy history, not only because of its long run but also because of its willingness to experiment with uncomfortable ideas. From a tiny pilot filmed with borrowed cameras to a record-breaking sitcom watched by fans around the world, the journey of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia proves that sometimes the most unusual and risky ideas can become the most lasting successes in television. Looking back at the full story of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, it is clear that the series' success is the result of a combination of creativity, persistence, and risk-taking. What began as a small, almost amateurish project in Los Angeles, filmed with borrowed cameras and minimal resources, became a show that redefined modern sitcom comedy. Rob McElhenney, Charlie Day, and Glenn Howerton took inspiration from a dark and unusual dream to create characters that were selfish, irresponsible, and often cruel, yet strangely compelling. By embracing characters who were completely unlike the polite or moral protagonists common in television at the time, the creators found a niche audience that loved the show's unpredictability and willingness to go to uncomfortable places for humor. The series' production journey highlights the extreme challenges of making television with limited resources. From the early days when all actors shared a cramped trailer, worked low-paying jobs, and helped with cameras, lights, and boom mics, to later seasons when the budget finally allowed for professional equipment and staff, the show's roots in resourcefulness and improvisation never disappeared. Even with rising budgets and the addition of iconic actors like Danny DeVito, the series continued to embrace the chaotic, rough-around-the-edges style that made it distinctive. Physical comedy remained a cornerstone of the show, particularly with Caitlin